Hey, everybody. Welcome to the new and improved True Crime Time. Thank you for joining me. It's good to see some familiar names in the chat. Angel, Letty, great to see you. Grunger, hello. LLOG, hello. Thanks for joining. Pink, good to see you. So I'm using a new software tonight, so it should be a lot more interactive. I'm really excited about it. Yep, the mug is nice. I just wish we could set our own prices on that. The merchandise, But the mug is nice. It does well in the microwave too. I heat up my coffee over and over again, and it does well in the microwave. So I really like it, but it's a cool logo. So precursor to tonight's video, it is going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit. Unless everybody wants me to read some of the motions to redact and seal, we could do that if you're more into reading those. Give me a vote on that. Give me a 1 if you'd rather go down the rabbit hole. Give me a 2 in the comments if you'd rather talk about some redact and seal motions tonight, Friday night. So what I want to do tonight is just kind of share a little bit about what I've been reading and thinking about. I'm not claiming that I'm right about any of this. I'm not diagnosing Bryan. This is just a discussion about some things that we do know about Bryan. I'm not chasing anything that we haven't heard, but I do want to go back a little bit into when Bryan first moved to Pullman and kind of what was going on in his life and what happened over those months leading up to the murders. Friday night, Angel. Yep. Dolphin says, I want to see where your rabbit hole goes. Yeah. It's not too crazy, but it's different, something interesting in the case. These are the things that I really enjoy are, trying to figure it out and, take a piece of the puzzle and see if it fits. Maybe it doesn't, right? Talk about it. Part of why I started my channel was to discuss it with all of you as well. And so I really enjoy hearing your feedback in the chat. And I'll try to highlight your comments as much as I can here. But I've been thinking about, Bryan's mindset leading up to the crime and what could have been going on. And I think it's more complicated than, we're going to be able to figure out. I mean, a lot of times, all of the evidence and you still don't know what a motive is or why they chose a certain target or why they did what they did. And so, looking from the outside in, it's really tough. But if we look at, a few things that, happened in Bryan's life, probably in the, I'd say 10 years or so leading up to the murders, it does make more sense than we initially thought. Before I get too far into it, though, I do want to take a second to thank all of the precinct members. So really quick, James Hollingsworth, he's been a member for 2 months. He's got the purple logo. I call it the purple belt. Letty C, 4 months, purple belt. You're getting close to your green belt. Angel D, you just recently got your 6-month green belt, green logo. Congratulations. And then Kelly Malone, thank you so much. 8 months, green belt. You're getting close to the final level of the red belt. And we have 1 red belt in the group, Marion M, who's been a member for 16 months and has the red logo. Really appreciate all of you for supporting me, especially from the very beginning. And it's great to see most of you here tonight. So I want to back up a little bit to when Bryan was in high school. So his sophomore year in high school, there was a counselor at his school that was interviewed, and they had said that Bryan, his dream was to join law enforcement. And, we've all seen that photograph of Bryan doing the push-ups in high school in his yearbook, kind of in the uniform. And so, Bryan was very interested in becoming, a law enforcement officer, it sounds like, not necessarily a CSI investigator or even a working in digital forensics. I think his schooling took him in that direction to some extent with some of the courses that he took. But I think initially he had this mindset that he wanted to be a law enforcement officer. And those of us who follow true crime, we all know, there is a lot of connections to people who work in law enforcement and them committing crimes. There's a lot of domestic abuse and things like that with people who work in law enforcement. And so, not saying that that's the case here, but that is a connection when you talk about, why do people commit crimes, and then, what kind of jobs do they do? And there's actually a case that's very close to my family that involves a law enforcement officer murdering a very good friend of my family's. And so I've experienced it firsthand. So, this is a common theme. And so Bryan initially had, this early interest in law enforcement. Well, what happened was his sophomore year in high school, he was actually kicked out of that program that they had at the school. And the reason he was kicked out is because there was this incident that was involving female students. Now, we don't know what the incident is. They haven't released that. Now, there was an interview done of the counselor who was working at the school. Her name was Tanya Carmela Beers, and she's the one who kind of explained some of this information. But Bryan had been kicked out of this program, and I guess there was this investigation that had occurred, and this led to his removal from this program. So again, we don't know what it was, but this counselor went on to say that it was not related to violence. It wasn't related to drugs. It wasn't related to cheating, but she did say that it was something that was pretty serious. So everybody, if you can, in the comments, what other thing do you think would be serious involving female students in this program that could have occurred? Just what other types of violations could have occurred in your opinion? If it's not violence, if it's not drugs, if it's not cheating, what else could it have been? What do you all think? I'm going to just kind of pause here and scan really quick what everybody thinks. Stalking, interesting. You know what? Sexual harassment, KJ says. Yeah, and so I think in this case, it's taking place at the school. Maybe he was following somebody home, or was caught, watching or doing something unusual like that. It could also be some sort of harassment, sexual harassment. I thought it could also be like a peeping type thing. We don't know, but again, it involves female students. And again, this is all speculation. These things that we're talking about. I know somebody's going to join halfway into this video, and they're going to hear me talking and think that I've solved the riddle of Bryan Kohberger, or I'm trying to claim that I have. That's not the case here. Again, this is just speculation. So anybody who's in that camp, who's kind of, against that, just to be clear. So again, we don't know what it was. It involves female students. It wasn't violent. It wasn't drugs. It wasn't cheating. She said it was pretty serious. I agree with what I'm seeing in the commentary. It could be any of those things. We don't know, but there was something that occurred, and this is a fact. So, we can dispute whatever the reason is, but we know that this occurred, and there's got to be a record of it. I would imagine there was an investigation that took place, and these things can actually be used later on in the trial. There are rules against, records and things from the past like that can be used as far as criminal cases. But when it comes to things like sentencing and things like that, it can be very relevant. And keep in mind, there is kind of a battle going on right now regarding the death penalty. We've heard that in these recent hearings where the defense has commented a couple of times about the death penalty and them trying to get that taken off of the table. So there's a lot of things at play here, as far as this positioning that's going on with the trial. But this is something, from the past of Bryan's, that there's going to be a record on this incident that he had with females at his school. So the next year, he's kicked out of this program, and the next year he doesn't go into the law enforcement program. He instead goes into the HVAC program, the air conditioning, and kind of studied that for his junior year. So no going back there the next year. He was booted from the program, it sounds like. And then his senior year, he actually completed online. So he wasn't really interacting with people a whole lot. His senior year, he was doing that online and actually graduated a little bit early. So he was good at the online schooling. So Rob says, free BCK. I love it. I love the difference of opinion. That's okay. That's what this channel is about. It's okay to be on either side. Just be polite, be respectful, state your side, state your theories, talk about what you're thinking. That's fine. Don't insult anybody. Don't get mad if somebody has a different opinion. That's what this is about. This is, why we're here. We're here to discuss this together. I love difference of opinion, though. I love different theories and ideas. Tess says, thank you for your insightful podcast. You're welcome. Thank you for watching. So Dolphin actually says that he was specifically placed in that HVAC program because it didn't have any females. Interesting. So we do know that there was some sort of conflict or incident that occurred in his past, his sophomore year. And this would have been around the time that Bryan was using drugs that we've heard. He was using heroin in high school, which is pretty hardcore. A lot of teenagers and things like that experiment with drugs in those years, but to be into that at that age it happens, but that's no joke, right? And so he was going through a very hard time during his high school years, right around this time that this was happening. So we have drugs involved, and we have this interaction happening with females at his high school. So after Bryan graduates, he struggles a bit from 2013 until 2016-ish. He struggles with drugs, we've heard. He was arrested in 2014, and that was the incident where he had stolen his sister's phone. And he, I guess, sold it at the mall and then got arrested. That's what, said something to his dad, we've heard, about, don't do anything stupid. And so he's kind of had this history there with a little bit of a domestic incident, right? We referred to that earlier when we talked about the law enforcement connection, Bryan's interests, and here we have a little bit of a domestic incident brewing. Again, we do not know Bryan's childhood, the family life. We're speculating here. But again, there's another small connection, and again, seeing if the puzzle fits. That's all we're doing. We're just discussing this. These are my thoughts, honestly. This is, I'm here to share it with you, and so Salty Sleuth Investigate says believe his thoughts started around age 14. Very possible. Very possible. There was early drug use with Bryan. If he had accelerated to heroin so quickly, he may have started at a very young age with other things as well. So I got to pop Angel up here. The comment, like this channel, but I don't know if BK is guilty. And that's okay. Nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows. We're just kind of, what do we think right now? What do we think based off of what we've heard, what we've researched on our own, what we've, read and seen and kind of picked up from the trials and read through the documents. We all kind of have our opinions on, if he's guilty or not. Some of us are in the middle. Some of us are more pro innocent, pro guilty. That's fine. If we were all on a jury, that would be a healthy jury, right? If we were all sitting on the jury, all of us, and we had to come to an agreement and unanimously, right, on Bryan's guilt, it would be good to have that healthy conversation and to have those different views on what we're seeing. So maybe I say something tonight that makes sense to you, and in the comments I see something that makes sense to me, and hopefully down the road we all put it together, right? And that's what I love about this community and everybody who joins my lives. Everybody's very insightful and intelligent, and I learn a lot from everybody. So more to come. We're going to learn a lot in the trial. Of course, we're all looking forward to the trial. We are going to learn a ton once we see more evidence, and And that will give us a little bit more insight, and it might change some opinions one way or the other. Marietta, I love it. Marietta is also. So let me get this figured out here. Bryan is innocent. Love it. Okay, so Bryan graduates high school. He's arrested in 2014. And this was right after he had gotten out of rehab. So he went through rehab and was, rehabilitated to some extent, and gets out. But it sounds like he continued to use drugs, because at one point he claimed that 2016 had been, 2018 had been 2 years sober for Bryan. So I think he stopped using drugs around 2016, which was great, right? So he has this incident at home. He has this kind of conflict with his dad. He steals his sister's phone, and then probably has some troubled times. And then he kind of turns it around, and he decides to go to school and pursue a degree. And it seems like he's really on the right track. He's successful at Northampton. In 2018, he graduates from Northampton. And then he goes on and he graduates from DeSales in 2020. In 2022, he graduates again, right, with his master's degree. So he does a really good job for a while, right? He kind of gets on the right track. But we still don't know what's going on, right? In his head, from the early childhood incidents and the drug use. There are effects from that in your early adulthood. But he's doing well. He's holding it together, and he has good reviews and good feedback from his peers even. And then in 2016, from 2016 to 2021, he's working in a security guard position. So he's actually doing something very close to what he wants to do, right? Working in law enforcement. So he's very close, and things are going well. So he gets to 2022, and he decides to pursue the next step in his career and his pursuit of education. And sounds like he started looking into the Pullman area. And there was actually a job posting there in the Pullman Police Department back in, I believe it was March or April, that he had applied for. And it doesn't sound like he got the role. They haven't said one way or the other if he got offered the job. Sometimes they even just say, hey, right now we're not, it turns out we're not filling the position right now, but in the fall we might be. There's a transition happening with the chief, because that was going on. You never know. But he did apply in March. It didn't work out at that time. And then he moves to Pullman in June to attend school. So he's there, we'll say June 1st in the summertime. And he had actually, when he moved to Pullman, he had attended a pool party shortly after he moved there. And he was interacting with some people. They had interviewed a few people that were at that pool party. One being his neighbor who lived nearby him in that apartment complex. And he did talk to that person. And that person said that they kind of, befriended Bryan to an extent. They almost, in a way, I'm not going to say felt bad for him, but they noticed that he was trying to meet new people, right? And so this was a nice person who had kind of reached out to Bryan to be their friend, and turns out he lived nearby as well. But before Bryan had moved to Pullman, there were also some reports of some incidents at that brewery that happened, and that was also related to women. And this is just kind of another thing that we've heard about, that there are witnesses stating that they encountered Bryan and there was some sort of conflict with a female. And this was at a brewery, and, they've tried to interview, people have reached out to this restaurant to try to talk to them more, and they're not really answering questions about that or anything, but that it was reported, right, that there was some sort of record of Bryan at this restaurant saying, hey, this guy, they put something in their computer there that tracked who he was and said, hey, watch out for this guy for whatever reason. So he moves to Pullman, and apparently at this pool party, Bryan's not, we hear about Bryan and we've heard this term awkward and standoffish or whatever. And I don't necessarily think that, he was awkward in the sense of standing in the corner and not saying anything. I think from what I've heard, he was pretty outgoing. And apparently at this pool party, he approached two women and spoke to them. This is according to his neighbor, his friend at the pool party. And he approached two women and actually got their phone numbers at this party. And so apparently he's not afraid, to talk to women or talk to other people, because other people have talked about how he would come up and talk to them and be very, chatty. And the DJ at the pool party said that he even came over and was very talkative and outgoing. He just said that he was a little bit awkward in the fact that he kind of stood too close and was, just didn't really respect that personal space. And so there was this kind of underlying awkwardness with this interaction. And so I think that's what people are getting at when they talk about Bryan and kind of his awkwardness. I don't think it's necessarily that he's quiet and just this creepy guy. I think that, he's probably pretty personable to an extent, but I think there's this edginess from what we've seen in the body cam footage from his traffic stops. There is a little bit of this kind of edginess to his personality. But he is very talkative, right? In those traffic stops, you do see Bryan, just talking to the officer quite a bit. So he's not shy in that aspect. So he moves there, goes to this pool party, kind of makes a friend, talks to a couple girls, normal stuff, right? Everything seems normal. And then in August, this is when we've heard about the time that, Bryan was driving around the King Road neighborhood. And this would have been shortly after the pool party, about a month or so, apparently. And the pool party was in Moscow. And we don't know. Maybe one of the victims could have been at the pool party, or we just don't know for sure. It's just one of those theories that a lot of us have probably heard floating around out there. It's one of the possibilities where he may have crossed paths initially with one or more of the victims, but we don't know. But he was at this pool party, and then in August he's pulled over by a police officer at 11:37 at night. Nearby that neighborhood where the victims lived. We've not seen that body cam footage. They're not releasing it. I've requested it twice. They're not releasing it right now because everything's under seal. And who knows? Maybe there is something there that's relevant. But it is at a minimum, it's going to prove that he was in the area, and that's going to align with his cell phone pings matching up with what the prosecution is trying to get across. So that's going to support that argument at a minimum. We don't know if there's anything else there. Could he have been, just the fact of he were wearing dark colored clothing, I think adds to the story. It would, not necessarily in the court system, but if it's just one more thing, if we were to see body cam of Bryan being pulled over 2 miles from the King Road house at 11:37 at night, and he's in dark clothing creeping around, it's just one more thing. But we haven't seen that body cam footage yet. I'm sure we're all anxious to see that. Maybe after the trial, maybe during the trial, we'll see that. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just like the other traffic stop. But why would they release the other traffic stop, the one from October when he was pulled over near WSU, but not release the one where he's near the Moscow house? And because it's more relevant to the case, right? Maybe. So he's pulled over in August. This is shortly after he moved there. And then all of a sudden in September, on September 23rd, he has this altercation with his Professor Snyder. So think about that for a minute. So Bryan is pursuing this new opportunity in Pullman. He gets there in June, and he's starting, the new semester in college. He's going to be a TA. He's going to be interacting with students. He's got his whole future ahead of him. Possibly a law enforcement job opening up in town at Pullman, maybe. And here it only takes him 3 months to screw it up. 3 months. June, he moved there. And by September 23rd, he's having this conflict with his professor. And this is on record. This isn't me this is on record. He has this conflict in August. 3 months. It took him 90 days. He couldn't even hold it together for 90 days. So there's something going on here with Bryan. It's starting to unravel here for Bryan. He'd been holding this together, And again, this going further back, right? Younger years, drug use. We don't know what's underlying there with Bryan, psychology wise. We're not diagnosing Bryan. We don't know. But what we do know is that he moves here, and it's within 3 months, he's having conflict with his professor, the person who's mentoring him, the person who's there to counsel him and help lead him and help him through his education. This is the person he's having this conflict with. So September 23rd, he has this conflict with Snyder. Then on October 3rd, about 10 days later, there's a discussion. He has a meeting here. Somebody else comes in, the director comes in, right? And they have this meeting with Bryan and this discussion about the altercation, right? Talking to. So imagine like somebody's job and they're not performing in their job, and they blow up on their boss, right? Their manager. And then they have to sit down and say, first of all, that's unprofessional. Because later on, 2 weeks later, on October 21st, Snyder emails Bryan Kohberger regarding not meeting the standards of the TA requirements for his position. And so it sounds to me like there's two things happening here. There's a conflict happening where he's not being professional with his superior. And the other thing is he's not meeting his requirements. So, here Bryan was for 4, 5, 6 years doing really well, excelling. And all of a sudden it's crashing around him. In just 3 months, this happens. His dad had moved him out there. His dad helped him move there. Keep that in mind, because I do think that's why his dad went back for the trip back. I don't think it was just to drive him back. I think they were moving Bryan out. And that's why his apartment was sparse. I think it was, getting him moved out, and then maybe he was going to go back and get the rest of it when he went to wrap up something out there, but they arrested him before that happened. But his dad goes out, moves him out there. 3 months later, he's getting disciplined. And interestingly enough, on October 21st, that's that night that Buddy was hurt. So this would have been the same day that Bryan got an email from his boss, essentially telling him he's not meeting expectations. Not saying it's connected. We all know. We don't know. We all have our theories on that. I think it's strange. And if it's not Bryan, then there's some other dude out there killing little dogs potentially that nobody's looking for. So it's just kind of weird, the timing of that whole Buddy thing. I just got to throw that out there. But things are kind of unraveling here for Bryan, regardless of the Buddy thing. He's, again, altercation 3 months in, follow up from his boss. And then on November 2nd, there's another meeting, and they're putting Bryan on what's called an improvement plan. And just again, like if it's your job and you're not doing well, your bosses are going to put you on this plan. And the reason they do this is there's two reasons that somebody goes on an improvement plan. It's because they're going to get them on track and help them and resolve the issues that are happening, or they're going to get rid of that person. And so management and things like that, depending on the situation, the first step is to help that person and get them on track and manage them up, right? Manage them up to get them on track. But eventually some people get to the point where, or some things are so egregious that you have to manage that person out, right? So there's two things happening here, but they're putting Bryan on an improvement plan, and it's in relation to these incidents that he's had. So that was on November 2nd. This is 9 days before the murders happened. So everything's kind of spiraling. So in addition to this, in the fall of 2022, Bryan had interviewed a second time in Pullman for a law enforcement job, and it doesn't sound like he got that role either. And so he's been passed up now twice, and he's having these conflicts with his professor. And then in addition to the conflicts with his professor, we've heard reports of him not getting along with the students in the class, and they call it a cohort. And so a cohort is a group of students who are studying the same thing, essentially. So they're taking the same classes, the same courses. And so they're experiencing a lot of the same challenges together, and they'll bond over that. And there's actually a student in Bryan's in the graduate class. His name's Benjamin Roberts, who was interviewed. And he talked about how Bryan was kind of trying to fit in with the cohort and how he was trying to, get along with people, but he was awkward. And there's reports, that Bryan was condescending, and he would, kind of had to be right. He had to prove his intelligence, not just, it wasn't enough that, he was your equal. It was, he had to be one step above that, right? I think they call that, what is it? Megathelioma or something like that. But it's when somebody, has to be better. Right. And so I'm going to play this interview really quick with Ben Roberts. I don't know how many of you have seen it. It's actually kind of a hard one to find. Let me know, but if you could, in the chat, just put a 1 in the chat if you've seen this interview with Ben Roberts, Benjamin Roberts. And what he's going to talk about here is this. So again, I left off on November 2nd. So this would have been just before when the murders happened. Benjamin Roberts here is going to talk about just after the murders happened and Bryan's behavior a little bit in the class. And he's going to talk a little bit about how Bryan was trying to fit in. But it's an interesting interview. The audio is not great. He has a bit of an accent, but check this out.
So looking back at the Tom following the homicides over in Moscow, Idaho, I did notice that he was showing up to class a little late sometimes. He always had a coffee in hand. He always seemed to be just perpetually exhausted. And most of that, as a graduate student, that is not unusual. That is fairly normal. It didn't raise any red flags at the time. And like everybody in a graduate program, there's a little bit of awkwardness. You're trying to fit in. You're trying to find your niche. And Bryan Kohbergrs fit that. He was awkward. He was trying to fit in. He was trying to get his inroad into this group and establish these social bonds with other members of the cohort. But now looking back in hindsight, having these allegations come almost entirely out of left field, all of that feels less like normal trying to fit in, and it just feels unsettling.
The quote in the Times was something about seeing him and just feeling like he was on knife's edge. He just had so much tension.
Yes.
Can you speak to that?
Bryan seemed like he was on the knife's edge between exhaustion and burnout, and at the time it was extremely difficult to tell which was which.
But then he changed after. There was a point where he changed. It became chatty and became. Can you explain that transformation?
Yeah, he did seem to get a little chattier going into the later parts of the term. He was always talkative in the beginning of parts of the term. He very much liked it when everybody in the room knew that he knew what was going on, but it wasn't enough that you knew that he knew. He had to make absolutely sure you understood that he was smart, that he had this intellectual capacity.
Almost analytical to criminology in a sense. That
Yes.
You're talking about as a subject matter, looking at this crime, speaking to it in the context of your academic study.
Bryan always wanted to be the smartest person in the room, and he wanted to make sure that you knew he was the smartest person in the room. He had a habit of finding the most complicated way to explain concepts, and he would explain them, and he would explain them well. He had a very analytical mind. He would break things down. But in hindsight, looking back at that now, it feels a little uneasy. And there is that first term awkwardness. We're all coming into this program together for the first time. We're all sitting down for the first time together. And so much of what I had just dismissed as awkwardness now, because of these allegations, feels like it's cast in a different light.
So he's an interesting guy. If you watch the full interview, I'll link that when I'm done with the live here. I'll post the link to that full interview. It's about 20 minutes. He's interesting. What he's doing, though, the reason it sounds a little bit rehearsed with him is he's actually repeating a prior interview that he had already done. And so what the reporter's asking him about are questions that he had already answered in a previous interview. And so he already knew the answer. It was kind of a repeat of the previous interview that he had done. And so some of those questions, he was trying to be clear and explain to the reporter what he had said previously. And he stumbled over his words a couple of times, and he said, can I redo that? But seems like a pretty interesting guy. He doesn't say anything negative about Bryan. He just talks a little bit about his behavior. And as you heard, he talks about how Bryan was talkative. He was smart. He was analytical. But it sounds like he didn't get along with people for whatever reason. There was something going on there where he had a hard time connecting. It sounds like, based off of what people have said. And at one point, even the students there was another interview where they talk about Bryan had, because he was so hard on them with his grading and things like that. One day, I guess Bryan stood in front of the class and they all kind of had this talking through, of some of the issues and kind of hashing it out. But it was kind of all of the students and then Bryan standing up there having this back and forth, which I think it would be a very interesting interaction to have seen for sure. Really quick, got to pop up a couple comments here that I saw earlier. Let's see here. I saw one. Yeah. So Angel, you'd mentioned reading his responses there. I think it sounds a little rehearsed because it's pretty much the interview he had done previously. So much evidence. Marietta's talking about the tires. So much evidence out there that we don't know about. Angel, yeah. I think it was egregious. Did I say? Was that the big word? Thanks. Took a second to come to me there. So again, everybody, 3 months, Bryan had moved from June to September. He's kind of settling in there. He's in the Moscow area, according to law enforcement, in August. And so it makes you wonder, when did he first come across the victims? How was that house identified, or the victim, or the target, the initial target, excuse me. When did that happen? We don't know. And that's another one of the mysteries. Was it one person? Was it multiple people? I do have some thoughts on that. And that's actually part 2 of this live. My next live is going to be a follow-up to this video. I kind of wanted to talk through some of my thoughts right here with Bryan's background before I transition into that other piece, because it'll make more sense. And so be sure to catch my next live, which is going to be part 2. And that's going to talk a little bit more about the actual crime that took place. And there will be just a warning, a couple of graphic spots in there that I wanted to talk about, but that'll be in my next live. So I'll be sure to schedule that ahead of time for you. So here we have Bryan moving within a few months, conflict, and the murders happen November 2nd. And then his classmate says that he's coming to class late. He's kind of got his coffee in his hand and he's on the edge of burnout and exhaustion. He can't tell which, right? And a lot of students are going through that, which is understandable. But there was a bit of a change to his behavior, according to this person and some others that were interviewed. Bryan's neighbor had also talked about how Bryan became talkative and would actually bring up the murders in Idaho in their conversations in the hallway at their apartment complex. And so apparently he would ask, his neighbor, "Oh, have you heard about this? And I heard it was a crime of passion. I heard they don't have any suspects." So according to Bryan's neighbor, Bryan was very aware of the crime. And also in Bryan's class, I believe they discussed the crime as a case study that had just happened. And he was present. Some have said he was present for that. But I'm pretty sure Bryan was aware of the murders that had happened. He was very aware of the Bryan Kohbergrs incident while he was on the road traveling across the country. So I would imagine he would be aware of this crime that had happened, yet he never came forward about being out driving his white car around that they were looking about to clear things up and assist law enforcement. What a great opportunity that would have been for Bryan, who wanted to get into law enforcement, to come forward and say, "Hey, everybody, heads up, I was driving around in my white car. I just wanted to let you know it wasn't me. I was over here, but I'm an expert in this stuff. Here's my card. Give me a call if," what a great foot in the door, a great way to make, but he keeps his mouth shut, doesn't say anything. So November 13th happens, and then Bryan goes back to school afterward, right? That's where we see this behavior change. And actually, Bryan has a review on December 7th. So this is a couple weeks after the murders happened. And this is in regards to his professionalism. And his review is, hey, it hasn't been perfect, but there has been some improvement, right? On December 7th. And that's interesting to me because part of my theory is this kind of buildup within Bryan and this boiling point essentially happening, and then this release, right, of this anger and frustration kind of finally he finally does it, right? This is my part of my theory here. And so that's interesting to me that, Bryan's behavior would have been more, I guess, subdued, right? And not as confrontational after this incident. He's kind of had this happen, and now he's in a different mindset, right? And he's changed his behavior, and he's, maybe trying to act more normal, right? And he's more conscious of drawing attention to himself. But lo and behold, 2 days later, he has another altercation with his professor on December 9th. And this is in regards to professionalism. This isn't, him not doing a good job or not having knowledge about what they're studying or being smart. It has nothing to do with that. This is about his interactions with his superiors and his peers and women that we've heard about Bryan. And then on December 19th, he's fired from the position. His dad had come out right around that December 9th altercation. I don't know exactly when his dad traveled out there to drive back with Bryan, but it was, obviously, we saw when they were stopped in Indiana. So he went out there for whatever reason. And then, we've heard Bryan's apartment was sparse. So it wouldn't surprise me if they moved some stuff out of Bryan's apartment. At a minimum, maybe he was moving to a new location out there. Who knows? But so Bryan gets fired, and it's almost like things have come full circle from his sophomore year in high school. He's in this law enforcement program, and then he has this incident with his peers and women, and he gets kicked out. He's caught up in drugs and gets his act together, and now it's come back around, and it feels a lot to me like some sort of relapse situation that could have happened, and it may have even happened earlier in that summer, right? And was kind of leading up to the murders, and why Bryan may have been struggling with meeting his requirements in his role and having these conflicts. There might have been this breakdown and relapse happening with Bryan. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the same drug. He could have, started using something else. It could have been a prescription or something that he was abusing. We don't know. This is just speculation. In my opinion, there was something happening with Bryan from the months of June until September, and then up to the murders, where his life wasn't going as he wanted to, and was starting to unravel and kind of spiral. Take a look at the comments here. Somebody says they're here for the battle in the comments. No battling. Yeah, Salty Sleuth. Salty Sleuth says, I'm here for the battle. So here we go. Jeff says, True Crime Time. Did you notice that the fifth time the Elantra passes by the Linda Lane camera, it's traveling at a higher speed than the previous 4 times? I did. Yeah, I noticed. I also noticed when he comes around that final time before he stops and then turns and goes straight back down. In my opinion, anyway, when he comes around the corner, it almost looks like he's gonna circle around, and it's kind of like a sharp, turn where he, kind of at almost like last second he makes that quick turn. Now, it's a good question, Jeff, on the Linda Lane footage. I think it's very interesting footage. I don't know. I'm not 100% on the validity of it. It matches up with the timeline. But I don't know. I don't know if that could have been manipulated or not. If it's legit, it makes sense, right? And it's interesting. Could it be a completely different car? I mean, why was it leaked? How could it have been leaked if it's evidence, if it's valuable? You really can't see if it's a white car or not. You can't tell. We assume it's a white car because it matches what the affidavit says, right? The description and the timeline matches up, but we never really get a clear view. There's that one view there, where it's kind of turning around, but it's still not 100%. It could be silver. So it's hard to say. Good question. But yeah, I did notice, a difference there. If it were the white Elantra, I think there was a buildup happening there. I think the circling was kind of, the psyching up before you go in and you do this. You guys are talking about soundtracks. I don't know what you're talking about. Can't keep up with it. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I do think that I think it's more right in front of us than we think. When I was on the Drunk Turkey show, they were great, by the way, and had me on their show. I had a great time. And they asked me a really good question about, what was your reaction when Bryan was arrested? And initially I was really surprised because, he's this I heard PhD student, and I'm imagining, somebody who's about to finish their PhD, not necessarily somebody who's just starting their PhD. And so we all kind of think, whoa, this guy's an expert, right? Expert on this stuff. Not necessarily, right? So remember, he was just entering the PhD. Not saying he wasn't knowledgeable and smart, but we had this perception of Bryan. We have this perception of him as this PhD student. I think he was a little more troubled than that. And I don't think things were going perfectly for Bryan. I think he was still struggling quite a bit with a few things internally and maybe even substance abuse. So, and it's kind of evidence to his character, right? It just kind of shows you, maybe there's some underlying things going on there that could have led Bryan to doing something like this, where maybe you would look at somebody and go, God, this guy's really got it together. Why would he be so stupid to do that? Why would he make these mistakes? Why would he do this? He had everything going for him. I don't think that was the case necessarily. And I don't think that he was necessarily an expert on committing crime. I think he was analytical, and I think he pursued certain areas of criminology. I don't think he necessarily was a CSI expert. I think he had some knowledge, and I don't think he would be flawless. I think he could have made a mistake, like leaving the knife sheath, for example. The phone stuff, whatever he was doing with his phone, turning it on and off, getting caught on camera. I don't think we try to rationalize what he was doing that night. And I don't think that he was rational. I think he was struggling. I think he was going through something and dealing with these internal urges. He's got these things going on with his boss. So there's something that's called displacement. And so that's when, for example, you take out your angers and your frustrations on something else than what's causing it, on something weaker often, especially people who are abusive. So, for example, somebody who's abusive might get reprimanded by their boss at work, and then they'll go home and abuse their spouse at home. So there's a term for that. It's called displacement. There's healthy versions of displacement. So some people can channel their energy toward a positive thing, right? And control that and cope with things that are happening in their life and control those emotions. Some people can't. And that's where, you have these unique people like Bryan Kohberger, if he's the person who did this, where he's not rational. He's not thinking like we would normally think. There's other things going on there. And so it's possible that there was, this displacement happening with Bryan's anger and frustrations and resentment, and he took it out on the students. And there could be other underlying things there. There could be a specific target. There could have been a previous interaction before he came to the conclusion that they were going to be the target. Initially, maybe he was, trying to talk to them or something just normal. And then they became on his radar, and then things kind of start unraveling, and then he's going to act out, and he decides that that's going to be his target. That's what we don't know. Again, there's just so many questions there. We don't know when he decided he was going to commit this crime. Was it in August? Was it on November 2nd? We don't know. Checking the comments here. There's a question up here I wanted to find. Mike says he was on testosterone pills. I don't know. I think maybe amphetamines. maybe, if anything, or some sort of medication. But Tess says, enjoyed DT and the positive. Yes, they were very nice hosts. I definitely hope they invite me back. Yeah, so Twizzle says, let's talk about the phone stuff. I mean, we can talk about it all day. We don't know what they have. There's going to be one expert on one side, and there's going to be an expert on the other side. And, you know, I'm pretty confident that the evidence they have is strong. The stuff we haven't seen. Phone data, you can dispute phone data forever. It's going to be who's more convincing and who can back it up with other things to support what they're talking about. I think it's a long road ahead for Bryan. If his alibi is he was out driving, oh, there he is. Drunk Turkey. Hey, man, thanks for joining. But if Bryan's out driving, you know, like he says, you know, he's got a lot to explain there, right? You can argue the cell phone data is this or that, but I think the prosecution is going to support their cell phone data with a lot more than Bryan's going to support his expert with. So I really think there's this kind of full circle happening with Bryan and this buildup, and he may have been looking at these students as an object to take out these emotions on. Maybe it was one to begin with. And I do want to talk about more of that in my next live, because I do have, that's a whole nother video to go through, because I do have some things I want to discuss with everybody and some thoughts on the way it played out in the house. But again, we don't know if he had one target. We don't know if it was the entire house, but I do think that there was, whether it was one person or all of them, this kind of almost like an outburst of anger that was being put on them based off of, I don't necessarily think it was just because of what was happening in his life. There's, like I said, there's more underlying things, but what I'm saying is things were just unraveling. And this was I think that from June until when the murders happened, this was a time in Bryan's life where things were going off track. You know, anger is interesting, because if you think about it, when you talk about things that bother people, and if you're talking about the psychological aspect here of Bryan and maybe, you know, some personality issues like we've talked about, you know, always having to be right or you know, be respected or seen as intelligent, the things that make people angry are things that matter to them. So if you were to tell me that I suck at playing the violin, for example, I wouldn't care, because I suck at playing the violin. I don't play the violin. I don't do it, right? But if you said, hey, you suck at making videos, that might bother me, right? I like making videos and it matters to me. Or if you said I sucked at my job, that might make me a little bit angry, right? So Bryan, for example, attending school and wanting this respect and applying for these law enforcement positions makes me believe that he has these underlying urges and yearn to be respected and to be seen as intelligent. And so I think it could all kind of come together there with what, you know, again, taking a piece and seeing if it fits in the puzzle. But we will talk more about kind of that. There are a couple of different theories that I don't know the answer to with what played out there. And for example, one of the things is, you know, why did Bryan turn right instead of left when he came down the stairs? So if he went upstairs first and he came down the stairs and his victim was attacked already and it was time to go, when he came down those stairs, all he had to do was take 3 steps to the left and he's out that door. But he chose to turn right. And so it's unknown, right? What was his intention? Was it one person? Was it all 4 of them? So we'll talk more about that. But I don't know. What do you all think? Again, this is just a theory I've thought through this week. You know, more than this week, but just something that I've been, you know, kind of playing through in my head on, you know, what could have been going on there with Bryan. And the other question is, what was going on just in the hours leading up to it? You know, what was kind of that buildup like? Very interesting to me. But I'm gonna scan through the comments here before we wrap it up. So about a couple minutes here of some questions and answers, and we will see what we can talk about here. Yeah, I saw your live earlier turkey show. That was good with Maori. Yeah, shout out to Angel. She actually got Daniel and I connected there. Daniel was trying to help me out and reach out, and it wasn't going through because whenever he tried to get my email, it wouldn't go through. And so Angel helped hook us up, and I really appreciate you guys supporting me, being a smaller channel, and you guys watching out. Yeah, phone jammers. Yeah, it gets crazy. Yeah, and DTS brought up a good point too, with police scanners and things like that. We don't know how deep, how the levels there of the process, the thought process that went on, leading up to the crime, and how long he had been planning it. Was it an impulse thing? Was it a shorter window of time than we think, or was it a period of months? Right. And then, did he just identify the victims when he moved there in June? Was it just like a June to November? It all just happened, and he came to this conclusion that it was going to be that house, or it was going to be them. Was there, who knows? Did he find them before that? We don't know. So Malibu says, changed the license plate. Well, I do think his registration was coming up, and maybe in the back of his mind there was a little bit of a thought there of he knew he might have been moving and getting out of Dodge, and that was a good time, right? It was a good time for him to commit the crime and go through with it. The stars kind of aligning. It's like, man, things are falling apart here. I'm pissed off. Screw this college town, my professor. He had his eye on this house or these girls for a while, and he's angry, and he's in his mind, he's been wanting to do this. Again, more underlying things. I'm not saying this is the answer. I'm just saying one layer of this, but more underlying things happening there. Was it just a 5-month, period, or, was it a 2-month period? This case has so many different layers of questions to answer. Yeah, I planned enough to obtain the clothing and the knife. Yeah. There was that Amazon warrant from November 1st until December 6th. And then there was another short window of March, just 10 days, March 1st to March 10th. Part of me wonders if it could have been may have even purchased the knife in Pullman before he moved. Yeah, this is a great point. So Drunk Turkey Chef says, which expert holds more weight? The one who is recognized by Secret Service, or the guy whose work was called junk science and not used as evidence in Colorado? And on top of that, he no longer testifies for the prosecution. He's now a defense expert because his data, his program isn't strong enough to convict somebody. And so when you're talking about somebody's life being on the line, having him on the prosecution side, it's a lot tougher of a route versus being a defense expert where they can get him introduced. I think there's a difference there, right? On the type of expert and what they have to prove. When you're on the prosecution side, you're proving facts. You're trying to prove data. On the defense side, you're trying to create doubt. You're trying to create confusion, right? And dispute the facts and the data. Great point. Yeah, so Cy Ray, if you guys didn't see the DTS live just about an hour before mine, they do go over Detective Mowry being looked at by the Secret Service, and very interesting insights there. But they actually were recognizing him for a job well done. I believe he analyzed about 60 terabytes worth of data for the year, which is incredible. And about 51 of those terabytes were from the Bryan Kohberger case, most likely. So Twizzle Stick says, judges ever get anything wrong? They do. Yeah, they do. I mean, if you see something, definitely say something. If you disagree with, what's going on, bring it up. Yeah. I mean, trials are crazy too, right? And right now it's not even the trial. Right now is the positioning before the trial. They're not at trial yet. And so you can't read into this too much. A lot of the things they're doing are standard. And then this is a complex case. And so some things might be taking longer. We have the FBI involved. It's very complicated. This isn't a normal case. And that doesn't mean that the prosecution and the defense are not working together to try to get to trial. Now, the defense might have a strategy to delay. That could be, but they are still behind the scenes working together to some extent, even though they might have some disagreements there. Right now, they're preparing for the trial, and they're working out what's going to come in as evidence and what is the defense. The defense is trying to gain as much insight as they can, because that helps them strategize on how they want to defend the case, but they also want to exhaust every loophole that they can. And so they're going to file every motion. I would hope that my attorney would do what Ann Taylor is doing and file every motion and look at every angle if I were indeed guilty. That's their job. And that's not necessarily a good thing for Bryan, because it makes it a lot harder later on appeal and things like that to say that he wasn't represented effectively. So let's get it all out on the table and find out the right answer. Let's find out if he is guilty. We're still, when we see the evidence, when the trial hits, minds might change. So Malibu says 2026. I hope not. I think at the latest next summer. I think possible maybe early Q1 of the year, potentially, depending on this next hearing. So on the 27th, the next hearing is going to happen. I'm going to try to stream that live on my channel. It just depends on my real job. So I'm going to try to stream that live on the 27th, but that might be interesting. We might get some answers on next steps here. Sounds like they're going to be putting some things out there that they need to get wrapped up. And I do think they're making progress. The last hearing, the prosecution and defense spent some time going through the list of all the things the defense was asking for. And quite a few of those things had been provided by the prosecution and were being checked off the list. There were a few pendings that they were working out. So maybe we're getting close to turning a corner here. Yeah, so Twizzlestick, that's a good point. Yeah, Mallory's training, I don't think it was that great either. I actually did a video like a year ago about Mallory and his training, and not necessarily being this extensive, amount of training, but the FBI is also involved. It's not necessarily just Detective Mallory. There's more people. They're not going to just discredit one person here and get something tossed out. Now, if they were to find some sort of, malicious act that was done, that's one thing. That's different. If they could prove that Mallory was malicious in trying to frame Bryan, that's a whole different story. Even an error in the processing of data, for example, not saving a log record when he was putting together his map, even a mistake like that in the processing of evidence in a case doesn't mean it's just a violation and it's gone. It has to be done in, bad faith, and there has to be a significant impact to the trial and the evidence as far as the relevance there. And so they don't just, find, oh, hey, you didn't save that log, well, now you can't use that cell phone data. That's not how that works. And the law is designed to protect people from malicious things, not just a slight error that somebody might make in the processing or handling of data. And if you're in the camp of like, hey, check every piece of evidence and how they processed it, check every log record and make sure they put the date in there and dotted all their I's and crossed their T's. And if they didn't, then he's free to go, regardless of whether he did the murder or not. I don't know if that necessarily proves his innocence, right? I want to see his innocence be proven. I want to see his alibi be proven and show me that it wasn't him. Don't show me a mistake that they made in getting him. Don't show me that they maybe looked something up on Bryan too early in the process, but he still did it. And so now he's got to walk free. I don't get that, right? I mean, I get it, what you're saying, but there's a difference, right? There's a difference between he's guilty and he's innocent until proven guilty, and he's innocent and him being acquitted, right? There's a difference to all of those things. And I want to see something that shows he's innocent, not just a mistake, not just an error that might get him off on a technicality or something. That's what bugs me about the strategy here with the defense. If he's got this alibi, then let's hear it, but they're using it. They're using it as a tool to manipulate in the process. And again, do what they're supposed to do as a defense team to try to save Bryan. But I think it's a very tough thing for them to do right now because I don't think there's a lot of things supporting his innocence. So again, attack the evidence, attack that one thing, isolate evidence, try to cast doubt, maybe get some things excluded, maybe fight to get the death penalty taken off the table, save his life in the process. That's also an angle of the defense team. If you can't prove his innocence or get him off for the crime, at least at a minimum, get the death penalty taken off. And I think that's going to come up in the hearing on the 27th, potentially maybe some discussion about the defense trying to challenge the death penalty at some point. Yeah, Drunk Turkey also brought up a good point about the black bag, the dark bag. So those exist, and very possible he just slipped it into a bag there and took it out, or even turned it off and put it into the bag extra. Why he turned it on, we don't know. I've heard good points about maybe even using an app for a scanner. I think maybe even GPS if he were taking a route that we assume he planned it, but maybe not. Maybe he wanted to, or maybe he wanted to see if law enforcement had been called and was checking some sort of scanner or something. DTS mentioned that when I was on their show. Yeah, so Twizzle Stick says they're using it as a tool to manipulate the process. Yep, housekeeping stuff. That's a great point. So KJ says, tying up loose ends and maybe setting the trial date. I agree. I think they're getting close of wrapping up some of these things. There will most likely continue to be discovery that happens. The FBI being involved, they could still be processing data, and so down the road there might be something that's also handed over to the defense team at some point as we get closer to trial. There's a time frame there where they have to have everything in, but it can continue up to pretty close to the trial date. Yeah. Definitely some thought, though, did happen with the execution of the crime. I do believe that. I think it would not surprise me if there was very minimal evidence, physical evidence. Now in the house, though, I think we might be a little surprised with what's in the house. I think there might be more than we've heard. We haven't really heard a whole lot about what they found in his apartment, the Pullman or the Pennsylvania house, his car. But inside the house, remember, very early on, they said that the person who committed the crime had made a lot of mistakes and was very messy. That was before we knew who Bryan Kohberger was. So there was a lot of things that happened in that house very quickly. This didn't take long, very fast, and I think it was very calculated to some extent. But I also think it was probably a blur to some extent to Bryan. A lot of times you hear about people who will commit these crimes. It's almost like they black out, right? Go into like this, days or whatever. It wouldn't surprise me if Bryan was just kind of like, what is that when you just see red, Yeah. Yeah. There's talk about defensive wounds and fighting back. But again, I'm sure there was some fighting back, but again, I don't think the fighting back was very effective or very long. It would have been a very quick attack. Yeah, so Angel, I did actually do a video regarding the note from Bryan from Montana. I think it was on one of my lives. So I did talk about that, and it's from what I was looking into, I think there may have been a class or a training course that Bryan may have attended in Montana. There was a course that was available up there for a forensic data program in regards to, I think, cell phone data. I can't remember which program it was, but I think maybe he could have been attending a course or something in Montana. It is weird. A note from Bryan from Montana. A note to dad from Bryan. That's another weird one. Who writes a note to their dad anymore these days? Yeah, maybe we'll revisit that one when we look at the Pennsylvania warrants again. It's an interesting conversation for sure. All right, everybody. Well, it has been a good live. I really appreciate everybody joining and watching. Thank you so much for the support. Make sure you hit the like button for me. That pushes the video to more viewers. I'll have my next live posted. It's going to be a follow-up to this video. Like I talked about, don't miss that. I'll get that scheduled in advance for you so you can plan to be there. And hit that like and subscribe button for me. And thanks for watching tonight, everybody.